So the first time Neil wrote about this, or was planning this workshop, he listed me as with a job in Germany. It wasn't official yet, so it was a big deal. I said, no, don't mention it yet. But now it is. So as of Monday, April Fool's Day, I am officially both Professor of Classics at Tufts University and Alexander von Humboldt Professor of Visual Humanities at the University of Leipzig, which is ironic because I am not really a digital humanist. I'm a classicist, but that's what they call me. So now I just have to say, Alexander, I talk a little bit about this chair because it's going to influence a little bit what I say and how I see the world. And it's named after a Prussian aristocrat, one of two brothers, two Humboldt, enfants terribles, 200 years ago, and Willie, the other Humboldt, basically invented the modern research university. And so what we do is largely shaped by this guy, by Wilhelm. Alexander sailed around and traveled in South America, and everybody around him died, as far as I can tell, from horrible diseases, and he soldiered on till about nearly 90. There's a wonderful movie called Measuring the World, comparing his life and that of Gauss. And the Humboldt Foundation is named after him, so I'm the Alexander von Humboldt Professor. And this is a thing which is designed usually to extract Germans from Stanford or from Southern California and to get them back to the homeland. And every year, one or two are, non-Germans are, for some reason, sucked up in this dragnet. And I'm one of them for this year. And so I will be going off. And it's kind of it's an academic windfall. There's like super prestige, the most famous, the humanists could aspire to would be like the MacArthur Genius Grant, and financially you get $500,000 over 5 years. At the other extreme, a Nobel Prize, to which we are not liable. Unfortunately, there's no relevant Nobel Prize for us. 10 million bucks, or 8 million euros, which is pretty good. And the Humboldt Professor, which nobody outside of Germany seems to have heard of, and so it's like, not even registering on the sort of Anglo-Saxon prestige meter, nevertheless does pretty well. And so we have, as a startup, 5 million euros over 5 years, and we got handed another 1.2 million euros, the source of which I can't mention because the official paper hasn't come in yet. And it's like getting $12 million of NSF support. So it's like, oh my God. I've had $2 million grants, and that's a lot of money. And what would you do? So the real question is, what would you do? And my brother is a New York lawyer, said, well, you're going to buy a big house and retire, aren't you? I said, no, unfortunately, it's not it's not that kind of money. I did not win the lottery. I can't spend it. They do pay me, which is almost enough to cover transatlantic life. So it ends up not being that much. It's for research, primarily. So what would you do? And what would you do? And notice, what would you do if you had a job and it was not in classics? In fact, I'm in a computer science department, which is wonderful because I am neutral with respect to all humanities departments. And digital humanities is a ticket to work on anything that one chooses, and I have lots of support to do that. And I think, we ended up, and basically they said, here's the money, now tell us what you're going to do with it, which is also weird, because I've had large grants, but you have to kill yourself and say up front what you're going to do. And here, they said, here's a check. Now write us a couple of pages about what you might do, and you can change your mind later if you want, just to keep us posted. I've been in this game a long time, so I appreciate this is kind of a wild scenario. And I was really engaged by the conversation that the American Philological Association has been having about its name and what to do about its name. This is from a recent blog post of the APA, the basis of our own personal experience. All members will acknowledge how hard it is to explain to, quote, civilians And I've been waiting for my admiral uniform. Or what would a classics uniform look like? It would look like, you know, the Swiss admiral with, like, you know, no navy and lots of gold braid, but maybe a couple of boats in the lake. But civilians, what the name of our organization actually means. Certainly, as many contributors to the discussion pointed out, classics and classical are not 100% transparent either, but to our colleagues, our students, and to the general public, they are far more recognizable and accessible terms in philology. Now, that may be true, but is that a good thing? You may ask. I get asked, what is classics? Usually after several drinks, when someone is like actually going to talk to me. What is classics anyway? I can't tell them what classics is because I'm not Winkelmann. And I don't have this idea of the classics. So, you know, this is kind of the starting point. So I've decided to try and do two things. And the first is to advance the role of Greco-Roman culture and classical Greek and Latin doubled, you know, I wrote this morning, in human intellectual life as broadly and as deeply as possible in a global world. And let me tell you, when I told my rector, my president and provost and various notables that's what I was going to do with the money, they said, we have the home of Bach. We have the end of the Cold War. We have the Reformation. We have, and you're going to work on Greek and Latin. Now, don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with Greek and Latin, but really? You know, I've already begun my career by annoying everybody, you know, upon whom I depend. But I think that the role of Greek and Latin, there's immense possibilities for it. But when I say advance the role of Greco-Roman culture into Greek and Latin, you know, if that's your goal, do you assume that that is by writing more articles for, you know, the American Journal of Philology, or by writing more, yet another monograph to go behind a subscription wall, or even if it's open access, to engage in discourse among a number of learned scholars, or what is your audience? And bear in mind, we now reach on the web potentially 2.3 billion people. That's as of 2011, most recent stats I could get. That's 1/3 of living, breathing humanity. So who's your audience? Is your audience the 40 people who are going to write for us for a 10-year promotion and invite us to give fancy talks? Or is our audience something else? And what do you want to do? So this is a question. You can answer this any way you want. But this is really the question I would pose. And then from that, you can draw various conclusions. And the second, I think, is to blow the dust off what I think, on reflection, is the simple, cogent, in ancient term philology, and to support an open philology that can in turn support a dialogue among civilizations. And one of the great problems of having departments of classics, so there's nothing wrong with having a department of classics unless you assume that's Greek and Latin. So the minute you say the department of classics is Greek and Latin, it's, you know, it makes it look fine here, and usually because we forgot what that meant. But if you were from India, or if you were working on classical Chinese, or if you were working in classical Arabic, and Greek and Latin includes Greek, or classics is Greek and Latin, that's a problem. Now my department, we teach Sanskrit. We're going to have classical Arabic with Maxim Romanov next year. We're going to have, and we teach about classical China and Greece. We don't have classical Chinese, so we try to do it. But it's really tricky. You got to be careful, because people will not yell at you as an American face-to-face because they assume you're going to be sort of solipsistic, and that's what those Americans are like. But they'll notice. And the same thing when you get beyond Europe and North America. So I really want to think about philology. And what is philology? Well, here is an absolutely clear statement of what philology is. That's a little sarcastic, a little ironic. In Latin, in the yearly birthday speech for the local Prussian king that poor August Burg had to deliver. But this was quoted to me when I was an undergraduate by a person who was hated by philologists and did not like philologists but loved philology, Cedric Whitman. And he told us that it was the cognitio universae antiquitatis, the understanding of the ancient world in all its complexity, or Philology is the analysis of the ancient world in its entirety, including everything in the physical and intellectual world through the use of written sources, which I think is a reasonable paraphrase of the sense of the Latin description that Burke delivers. So it is everything. It is an expansive, unbounded, dynamic, and determined effort to extract every scrap of meaning that we can from every surviving literary source from the past. And of course, in Germany, philology is everything. It's not just the ancient world. And philology is, and one thing I want to emphasize is that philology, if you have this view of philology, then that blows up your sense of what your task is. I mean, I had a colleague recently say, well, you know, it's really important that we not scare our students, and above all, no formulas for classicists. We can't have that because that'll upset them. And it's like, it's hard for me to be polite in all circumstances, but certainly then. Because no, it's anything at all that's going to shed light on the ancient world. Whether it's learning, you know, irregular forms, whether it's learning about drawing on the material record, or whether it's learning enough probability theory and linear algebra so you can understand the machine learning literature. It's driven by your goals. It's not driven by the curricula that happen to be there. And it's not there to make you feel good because you know the right things. In fact, in a dynamic field, the more alive your field is, the less relevant your training is, except insofar as it trains you to learn hard things and to be uncomfortable. And we have the opportunity to have the flagship, most intense and rigorous and exciting area with philology writ large, one that includes Greek and Latin and many other languages as well. And when you think about philology, people think, well, you know, it's this used-up discipline, and here we are. And of course, most provosts look at us in departments of classics as a legacy departments, as in the legacy system my bank uses that was built in the 70s, and we wish we could get rid of it. If you actually could poll what your provosts and presidents think, you would, and they said, if you could start a university from scratch, I'm not sure how many of them would have a department of classics from the clean sheet of paper. So it's easy to say, well, oh my God, you know, the history is against us, but the philology is actually has a short history as we understand it. And it starts with this guy, Friedrich August Wolff, and most of you know, hi, I'm Friedrich August Wolff, and most of you will know me from Philology, Homero, and other such films, but I can't resist. So, you know, starts this sort of Homeric, reawakens the Homeric question. But I tend to think of him at a very early stage of his life, and here's a long piece of text you probably can't read, that basically showed up at Göttingen at the age of 18. He walked out from his home and said, and he materialized, and they said, what are you going to study, kid? And he said, I'm going to study philology. And the provost or pro-rector said, son, you know, we don't have a discipline like that called philology. He said, well, you want to study? No, I'm going to do philology. Well, no, you got to do theology. And he said, no, I'm doing philology. And he did that because he didn't want to have dogma tests as to whether or not he was you know, theologically acceptable. And he insisted and got himself listed as a philologist, and supposedly, this is like the first person to major in philology in Germany. And it was not a top-down decision. It wasn't the rector, it wasn't the king, it wasn't the most important person, it was a kid who walked in a very hierarchical society and imposed his will and studied this and went off to Halle down the street from Leipzig and basically created modern, you know, the modern study of classics. So this came from one young person's, and their assertion happened before. Things go up, things go down, things can go back up again. So don't assume it can't change. And just go back to other cultural reference. This is actually an incredibly important film. It's the precursor to Star Trek and Star Wars. It's the first major high-budget science fiction film. And it's a beautiful film, very interesting, very thought-provoking. It is based on The Tempest of Shakespeare, and very influential to a number of people. As always, it has a 1950s poster that has nothing to do really with the plot, but it looks really cool. But this is the famous Robbie the Robot on the right. Can any of you name the person on the left?
Walter Pidgeon.
Walter Pidgeon, that's the actor, but and the character?
Oh.
Edward Morbius. And here's the question, and you may not remember the name of the actor, but you all have to walk out of here knowing what this guy does when I'm finished, what his discipline is. If anyone knows who didn't hear it from me, don't say it, okay? But so there's the script. So this is Robbie the Robot, and there's an exchange between the love interest, who is what's his name from the Naked Gun series, is a young man. Leslie Nielsen is the love interest. It's also worth watching this week. He's a straight guy, straight love interest. Doctor, how did you come by such a mechanism? He means Robbie the Robot. I didn't come by him, doctor. I tinkered him together my first months up here. And then Robbie, coffee is ready, sir, gentlemen. Adams, doctor, do you mean you made this gentleman? A useful enough toy, Lieutenant. But nowadays, I have no time for such things. And the question is, at the next line, we're going to find out what Dr. Morbius' discipline is. And just think about, what do you suppose the mad scientist would be who invents Robbie the Robot? And of course, Dr. Morbius, you're a philologist. An expert in words and languages, their origins and meanings. Glossing it, because nobody knows what a philologist is. Yet this robot of yours is beyond the combined resources of all Earth's physical science. My dear Commander, maybe you overestimate both Robbie and myself. It's one of the great moments in film, and nobody remembers that he's the staff philologist. This is 1956, this movie comes out, and when you wanted to imagine who was the real mad scientist, and what Dr. Morbius has done is he's gone and understood the records of the Krell, and created and tapped into their technology and revivified their society, and then created his own various monsters, a monster along the way. But it is he learned all their science. Nobody told him, you're a philologist, you're not allowed to learn any science. You can only read, be in the sacred groves of literature. Again, that's a later conception of what we do. That's not the early modern conception of the study of Greek and Latin. For him, it was the entire society, without bounds, without limits, without compromise. And that's the idea of philology active in popular culture in the 1950s. And that's one that is quite viable. So our goal, is, I decided, I guess, in talking to all my colleagues and friends, that what we would call the work we're doing over the next 5 years, at least in Leipzig, would be the Open Philology Project. And by open philology, I mean philology based on open data, so open in what it produces, and open in the conversations that it supports. And so engaging with anybody from around the world, and certainly we hope from multiple cultures and backgrounds. And there are 3 sub-projects of that that I'll talk about. Open Greek and Latin, e-learning for historical languages, and the SCAPE digital library. And so Open Greek and Latin, the goal here is to make as much data about Greek and Latin available as possible under an open license, ideally Creative Commons, attribution, and share alike, with no restriction on commercial usage. There's nothing wrong with making money, as long as the data is free and the source code is free. So let people go nuts. And we've done that with our data. Including, but not limited to, transcriptions of primary and secondary sources in every available version, including translations, and a growing body of increasingly well-structured machine actionable annotations. And every coherent statement at some level depends upon a series of annotations, whether you're transcribing a text, which is a series of annotations, or making some sort of statement about them. And the more you have, the more your rhetoric, your argumentation depends upon things that you can compute, the better. Even if what you're describing is not computable. Even if it's truth or beauty or whatever. Okay. And you know, one question is why would we be the leaders? Why would Greek and Latin, you know, lead in this? And I think there are various reasons. There's a sense of political decorum. I mean, if we try to lead with classical Chinese, I mean, we get slammed for being imperialists. With Greek and Latin, you know, that's appropriate. You know, especially if you have a transatlantic or, you know, European, North American project, that's the sort of what we should do. You want to demonstrate what you can do with comprehensive open data, and we got a lot, the foundations exist for us. We have immense advances in the OCR for classical Greek, which allow us now to generate very large collections, to begin to generate very large collections. We have lots and lots of source materials. The Hathi Trust has 70,000 books that they claim are in Greek and Latin. Metadata is not always reliable, but that's sort of a reasonable approximation. And I should say in the public domain, 70,000 public domain books in Greek and Latin. Greek and Latin really connects with all European languages. It's kind of the stealth discipline, because you have, everybody talks about Greek and Latin. There's scholarship in everything, including classical Arabic. And classical Arabic is one of the great classical languages. And the West really begins at the Hindu Kush. And if you really do Greek and Latin well, you realize that we are all part of a much broader cultural continuum. The fact that the Islamic world and so-called Europe, you know, fight each other doesn't mean that they're not intimately connected, far from it. And I think that the study, if we're going to advance digital classics, the study of Greek and Latin, we must have comprehensive open collections. We cannot build on collections that are restricted, where if you try to republish the results, you will get sued. You cannot, that's no foundation. We are screwed right now because of the nature of the restrictions on the collections that we build upon. And so we just need more data. There's a lot of work that's been done here. There's a long list I won't go into. You know, things like, this is a catalog. Andrew Brown and Allison Bayview have worked on this. And this doesn't look like much. This looks like a catalog, but in fact, this is a way of organizing many different versions of the same work, which is essential to what we do, as opposed to having one edition of everything. You know, which is not really what we want to do. Everything's a multi-text. You're always trying to represent the full textual history of a work. Here in Greek and Latin, Federico Boschetti is here, working with Bruce Robertson, have made immense strides in. And again, this is an error-checking environment that's very clever. You'll hear about fragmentary text right after me, as soon as I shut up. Alpheus.net with the best reading environment for Greek and Latin that hopefully we can fold or integrate in with what we're doing at Perseus finally. And I'm not going to go into what these slides do, but put it this way, we have enough tools, so it's not a question of someday, kid, if you're really good and you memorize a lot of irregular verbs, you can actually do something with Homer. It's now, if you want to get into Homer and actually work with it today, you can do that because we have alignments between every word in the Greek and the English, we have grammatical information, we have syntactic analyses. If this was popular music, you wouldn't think twice about it. You'd just get right into it. If you want to get fluent, if you want to internalize knowledge of a language, you can read it quickly. That takes some time. But you can get immediately into it, and there's no limits. So, scope, we want to have at least one version of every work through 600 CE, about 150 million words. As representative a collection as we can of later Greek and Latin, and that's billions of words. That's an unbounded set there. As many versions of work as possible, and where copyright restricts circulation, and in Europe it's explicit. If publication was 30 years or publication was 25 years, whatever the term, they do restrict recent editions. In those cases, we will provide, we want to provide an index of those places where, of the editorial decisions of otherwise copyrighted editions, because indices are fair use. We may have to do that in the US. And then we want to have a full workflow, one that starts from the written object and gets into the true digital born digital edition. And that's not just giving you a bunch of variant readings, but it's included. That includes deep linguistic annotation. And linguistic annotation is the foundation of digital edition that distinguishes it from print editions. That's a forecast, because that's going to be a social decision. And I think there are consequences of this open Greek and Latin. We're moving from millions to billions of words. It's not a bunch of scholars fighting about what they think about the same million or two words of canonical text that everybody writes about. It's about coping with billions of words of the Greco-Roman tradition. Every separate work and every version of every work, every manuscript now visible is an object of interest in a way that it was not in the world of mechanical reproduction. From scarcity to immensity, we have a global audience. We're not getting to them now, but how do you get to them? How do you support a reader who is in Indonesia, who does not have English, who does not have a European language? That's the grand challenge. And engage them and make it accessible to them. And anyone can work immediately, at least in English, with Greek and Latin sources. So it's a different way of teaching. So we need a virtuous cycle. We need basically Wilhelm von Humboldt's vision of Lernen ist Forschen. You learn and you conduct research at the same time. That's what defines higher education. If you're using a textbook, you're in high school, whatever they call it. If you're just following someone's lecture notes and you're not contributing new knowledge, you're in high school and you just don't know, whatever they call it. This is what defines higher education. But more increasingly, this is what happens in the sciences. And so I think I'll wrap up here very quickly in a couple of minutes. The next project, we need new kinds of learning, which I'll call roughly e-learning. But basically, how do you learn these languages in a digital age? And here we know, I think we understand it. We now understand some of the initial issues, but this is where we really need to learn the most. But how do you support people as they learn as much Greek and Latin for their particular purposes as they wish? You should be able to support people who want to read Homer, and who want to read Plato, or want to read the Greek, the Christian New Testament simultaneously, and at any time. We need to do that to have a community. You have to use every method possible. And this really is where the research is going to be, I think. And notice the two things I mentioned are the two things would be depth in traditional classics. Data entry, you're just doing a bunch of typing because you're not smart enough to write more articles about horse. Or teaching, where people will say, oh, it's very sweet that you do that. And that's very nice. Nothing it extracts more respect from me than my colleague Don Mastronardi, who is unimpeachable for others, writing a book on Greek, introductory Greek. That is really a heroic action, because it's not, in our traditional culture, no one would admit it, but it's not going to get you anywhere. This is the most important task before us. Our smartest people should be thinking about this first and foremost, solve this. A, get all of our Greek and Latin sources available where people can see them, and B, help people deal with them. Those are the two great challenges. Everything else is just us having fun. These are the two responsibilities that we have as professional classicists. Everything else is an extra. And that's obviously my overstated opinion, but that's, I think, the consequence of when you have this catalyst of digital stuff percolating through here. Okay, very quickly, most enrollments, Greek and Latin account for 3/4 of all historical language enrollments in the United States. This data comes from the MLA, not the APA. APA doesn't give us any statistics as far as I know, which is a real problem. We still have 50,000 Greek and Latin students in this country, but we dominate. And we must use that position to provide a framework to it that other languages can use. If you add Biblical Hebrew, you're 96%. And we need to basically support long-tail learning. Anybody should be able to study any language. And third, I'll end by saying The third effort is finally being able to support the Scape Digital Library, which we've been talking about for 5 years. Finally, we have some money, and we're going to do this and work with anybody we can. And the Scape Digital Library is basically about integrating data, from as much open data as possible about the past of any kind. That's the basic rubric. And our friend Ross Scaife, this is the kind of thing he wanted to do. And so to finish, what we're doing is we're really discovering a new world. And this world, this is the Eurasian world of 1450, as seen in the map. And that has been flipped so you can recognize it. This is the world. This is the world as it exists, a bunch of networks. And this is what we're trying to understand. And within this huge network, Greek and Latin occupy a central location. And we are privileged as students of Greek, those of us who are students of Greek and Latin, not everybody is in this room, but those of us who are students of Greek and Latin are privileged because we get to work not on a subject that consists of the sole classics of the world, because we get to work in a subject that is one of the great crossroads of cultural interaction that connects with many parts of the world, and which is a crucial component of a larger network of cultures who evolved over thousands of years and are now interacting in real time today in ways that were not imaginable a generation ago. That is the dialogue to which we can contribute, and to which a Digital Classics Association can be, or in which a Digital Classics Association can be a crucial player. Which one? I finished. We have an open philology conference that will be at Tufts in about a year. Look for a call for papers. It's a follow-up to a NEH workshop that we ran last summer. And with that, thank you very much.